Hello, it's the weekend of Saturday, June 10th and Sunday, June 11th. You are listening to Inception Radio Network, voice of the fringe majority. This is Carol Carl with UFO Headline News. And since it's the weekend, it's off the beaten path, where we step outside the box, the lines that define the broadcast for UFO Headline News during the week. Just some stuff that doesn't quite fit into that UFO-related. Well, but then on the other hand, what doesn't fit? Sometimes we think it really is all connected. Here's something that's connected. What's in the night sky? We figure that once you know pretty much what belongs up there, the stuff that doesn't stands out extra. From earthsky.org, here's what we can see tonight. Tonight, it's the end of Jupiter's retrograde, that is. The planet Jupiter pauses in front of the stars before resuming its usual eastward course along the zodiac. In other words, Jupiter becomes stationary on June 10th. It ends its westward or retrograde motion in front of the stars of the constellation Virgo the Maiden. This retrograde or westward motion for Jupiter actually began back on February 6th, 2017. But what does it mean, you ask? Well, Bruce McClure, who wrote this for earthsky.org, gives us an answer. It only means that Earth passed between Jupiter and the Sun earlier this year. That happened on April 7th. That event, which is called an opposition of Jupiter, marked the middle of the best time of year to see Jupiter, since the planet was closest to us and the brightest thing in our sky just about that time. The end of retrograde motion means the best months for seeing Jupiter are over. And yet, you might not believe it if you gaze at Jupiter tonight. Jupiter is still incredibly bright, brighter than any star in the evening sky. If you gentle listeners are residing in the northern hemisphere, you can look for this brilliant beauty of a planet high in the south to southwest sky just as soon as darkness falls. If you're in the southern hemisphere or mid-latitudes, Jupiter appears high overhead or high in the northern sky at evening fall. Far brighter than any star, this blazing world is even visible from a light-polluted city. You might even see the bright star Spica. That will be just to the east of Jupiter. Jupiter is the fifth planet outward from the Sun, while Earth, of course, is the third planet outward. In the language of astronomers, Jupiter is a superior planet. In their outward order from the Sun, the superior or exterior planets are Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Like all the planets, Jupiter always goes eastward in its orbit, or counterclockwise if you're viewing from north of the solar system. However, as seen from Earth, all superior planets spend a portion of each year moving westward in front of a backdrop of stars. There's a very good chart that explains all of this much better than the spoken word can do. You can find that chart later at ufo-headline-news.com. It seems that when the Earth in its smaller and swifter orbit swings by any superior planet, that planet appears to be going backwards in its orbit relative to the backdrop of stars of the zodiac, and this goes on for several months. It's comparable to passing a car on the highway, with that car appearing to be going backward relative to distant background. Of course, you know that car isn't really going in reverse. Neither is Jupiter during its time of retrograde motion. Starting June 10th, Jupiter's going to be moving eastward along the ecliptic again, going towards Spica, that brightest star in the constellation Virgo. You probably won't discern much, if any, movement of Jupiter in front of that stellar background for the next week or two. But keep watching as Jupiter moves toward Spica. It's going to pass 3 degrees north of the star September 5th. Bottom line, Jupiter ends retrograde motion June 10th, 2017. This means the best time to see Jupiter in 2017 is now past. But you won't believe it if you gaze at the planet tonight. Yes, that planet sparkles plenty. From bgrnews.com, Mike Weiner brings us this rather stunning headline. Something in space is killing off entire galaxies. When we think about the survival of the human race, we often focus on making sure our planet stays alive and habitable. But out there in the depths of space, there are entire galaxies being killed off in a manner that is utterly perplexing to scientists. So here comes a new paper. It's a PDF from researchers working at the International Center for Radio Astronomy Research. They address the odd and extremely troubling trend and attempt to propose an answer for what exactly is leading literally thousands of galaxies to die premature deaths. After studying a whopping 11,000 galaxies in the general vicinity of our own, scientists now believe that a process called ram pressure stripping is leading the ailing galaxies to be purged of their gas, preventing new stars from forming and leading them to sputter out far faster than would be expected. Without adequate gas to power new star formation, the galaxies simply get cold and die. According to Toby Brown, the PhD candidate who headed this study, during their lifetimes, galaxies can inhabit halos of different sizes, ranging from masses typical of our own Milky Way to halos thousands of times more massive. Toby Brown continues, quote, "As galaxies fall through these larger halos, the superheated intergalactic plasma between them removes their gas in a fast-acting process called ram pressure stripping," end quotes. He also says, you can think of it like, quote, "a giant cosmic broom that comes through and physically sweeps the gas from the galaxies. If you remove the fuel for star formation, then you effectively kill that galaxy and turn it into a dead object," end quotes. That's a disturbing notion, says Mike Weiner, who writes this, but he also says there's good-ish news. The process can take tens of millions of years to actually occur. So even if you were living in a galaxy where ram pressure stripping was occurring, you'd be long dead before it could actually affect you in any way. That's reassuring, right? Reassuring and mysterious. Speaking of mysteries, let's segue to this striking headline. Caught on video. Mystery creature spotted prowling the foothills in the La Crescenta, California area. We picked this up from television station KTLA.com. This story carries a byline for Tracy Bloom and John Fenolio. Here we go. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife is investigating after a mysterious ape-like creature was captured on cell phone video recently in the foothills near a hiking trail in La Crescenta, not far from the 210 freeway. Jake Gardner, and Jake spells that Gardiner, who works near the area, spotted the animal while taking a stroll in the woods during his lunch break last week. Quote, "At first, I heard a bunch of strange noises in the trees. Figured it was just some type of bird or something like that," end quotes. That's what Gardner told KTLA in an interview on Tuesday. A still uneasiness, though, came over him. He began to feel like something was out there watching him. So Jake Gardner pulled out his cell phone and began recording as he tried to determine whether anything was out there. At first, he couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. It wasn't until he checked the footage for a second time that he noticed something unusual. However, he wasn't quite sure what it was he'd captured on this video. Quote, "You can definitely see a torso and 4 limbs moving around and swinging around," end quotes, Gardner said. He continued, quote, "It's a pretty obvious kind of motion," end quotes. Yes, it is. And at the time of this posting, officials from the state's Department of Fish and Wildlife don't know what exactly the animal is either, but they have an idea. Quote, "We think it's a pretty good possibility that it is some kind of ape," end quotes. That's a quote from Andrew Hugan. He's the spokesman for the department. If the creature is in fact an ape, it could represent a serious public safety concern, according to officials. Quote, "These animals are incredibly strong, and they can very easily kill or seriously injure a person, because if this does turn out to be an ape, this animal is scared, hungry, out of its element," end quotes. And that's more quotes from Andrew Hugan. The article goes on to say that it's possible this was someone's illegal pet at some point, which would explain how this ape could have ended up in the area. Andrew Hugan said, quote, "People import the animals as illegal exotic pets. Now that's not great. But what happens is the animals can get out of control, and they either escape or they get too unruly, and the owners just let them go," end quotes. Officials say while there's no reason to be alarmed, they are still warning people not to go into the wooded area looking for the creature. Yes, so there are plenty of other woodland trails to hike in the area, folks. Just don't pick that one, not till they find out what this creature is. And if this broadcaster is accurate at all, we're thinking there are lots of folks out there who are saying, oh, please let it be Sasquatch, Bigfoot, yes. Fossils, anyone? Here's an article written by Hannah Osborne for Newsweek.com. 99-million-year-old baby bird trapped in amber, discovered in Myanmar. Researchers in Myanmar have discovered a 99-million-year-old baby bird encased in amber. The ancient hatchling died when it was just a few days or weeks old after a blob of sticky tree resin fell on it, leaving half of its body frozen in time. Enter Jing Lida from the China University of Geosciences. Lida led an international team of researchers in analyzing this 3-inch specimen. Their study, which was published in the journal Gondwana Research, that's spelled Gondwana, will help scientists better understand the toothed birds that lived alongside dinosaurs and how they differ from birds living today. The amber encases the bird's skull, neck, a partial wing, a hind limb, and 1 foot. The hatchling would have belonged to a group of birds with the hard-to-pronounce name called enantiornithines. Oh, let's spell that. Enantiornithines. Those guys were around during the Cretaceous period, 145 to 65 million years ago. They died out during the mass extinction event that killed off the dinosaurs. The National Geographic Society's Expeditions Council partially funded this research. The fossil was mined from the Hukwang Valley, spelled Hukawng, that's located in northern Myanmar. Scientists discovered the bird was unusual in several ways. The structure of its wings was very similar to those seen in modern flying birds, but it retained some features that are seen in more primitive theropods, that group of dinosaurs from which modern birds eventually emerged. Chen Guang, curator of a museum in Yunnan and owner of the specimen, told Xinhua, the newspaper, quote, "Many people thought this was a lizard, but the scales, the thread-like feathers and sharp claws on the feet were so noticeable that I thought they must belong to a bird," end quotes. The team says its analysis indicates this bird would have been able to fly from birth, meaning it was less dependent on its parents for care. This is in contrast to modern birds today, where most hatchlings remain in the nest before developing that ability to fly. Seng Kuai from the University of Taipei said the bird appears to have been out hunting at the time of death. Quote, "There were no obvious signs of struggle. The overall posture of the bird resembled hunting, with its lifted body, open claws and beak, and spread wings. It was possibly engulfed by falling resin at that exact moment it was hunting," end quotes. Researchers believe the specimen provides the most complete view of a hatchling's plumage from the Cretaceous period discovered to date, and that it provides an excellent reference point for comparisons with the body forms of other fossilized birds and feathers also found in amber. They wrote in the study, quote, "Overall, this new specimen brings a new level of detail to our understanding of the anatomy of the juvenile stages of the most species-rich clade of pre-modern birds and contributes to mounting data that enantiornithine developed drastically differently from that of modern birds," end quotes. Now let's see, gentle listeners, if it's possible to make a segue from an ancient baby bird trapped in amber to Egyptian mummy DNA. Well, we think we can anyway. Here it goes. Headline: Scientists thought ancient Egyptian mummies didn't have any DNA left. They were wrong. Lizzie Wade wrote this for sciencemag.org. Ancient Egyptian mummies preserve many details of the deceased. Facial features, signs of illness, even tattoos, but not, it seemed, DNA. After trying repeatedly to extract it, many scientists were convinced that the hot desert climate and perhaps the chemicals used in mummification destroyed any genetic material long ago. Now, a team of ancient DNA specialists has successfully sequenced genomes from 90 ancient Egyptian mummies. The game-changing results give scientists their first insight into the genetics of ordinary ancient Egyptians, which changed surprisingly little through centuries of conquests. This sequencing success, reported this week in Nature Communications, quote, finally proves to everyone that there's DNA preserved in ancient Egyptian mummies, end quotes. That's Albert Zink. He's a biological anthropologist at the Institute for Mummy Studies in Bolzano, Italy. He participated in a 2010 study that identified DNA sequences from 16 ancient Egyptian royal mummies, including Tutankhamun. But that study used polymerase chain reaction, a method that efficiently finds and extracts targeted DNA fragments, but cannot always reliably distinguish between ancient DNA and modern contamination. The new study, which was led by Johannes Krauss, a geneticist at the Max Planck Institute for Science and Human History in Jena, Germany, used next-generation sequencing methods to read stretches of any DNA present in a sample and fish out those that resembled human DNA. The complete reads allowed the team to spot telltale damage patterns associated only with ancient DNA. According to Hannes Schroeder, an ancient DNA researcher from the University of Copenhagen, quote, that makes the new analysis much more reliable. It succeeds where previous studies on Egyptian mummies have failed or fallen short, end quotes. Johannes Krauss, who has studied the DNA of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and prehistoric migrants to Europe, recently gravitated toward ancient Egyptian mummies because of the empire's tumultuous political history. At various points, it was conquered by Assyrians from the Near East, Nubians from farther south along the Nile, Persians, Greeks, and Romans, among others. Quote, our question was, did those foreign conquests have a genetic impact? End quotes. Krauss turned to a collection of 151 mummy heads from the ancient settlement of Abusir el-Malek, about 100 miles south of Cairo along the Nile. The settlement was devoted to Osiris, the god of the dead, making it a popular burial spot for many centuries. These heads were excavated and removed from their bodies in the early 20th century. They now reside in two collections in Germany, one at the University of Tübingen and Berlin's Museum of Prehistory and Early History. Radiocarbon dating shows the mummies span 1,300 years of ancient Egyptian history during many of the foreign conquests, and ultimately Egypt's incorporation into first the Greek and then the Roman empires. Whereas the mummy's soft tissue contained almost no DNA, the bones and teeth were chock full of genetic material. 90 of the mummies yielded DNA once housed in mitochondria, the power plants of cells. Mitochondria carries only a few genes, but they're so plentiful that it's often easier to find their DNA than the single full human genome of a cell's nucleus. Still, because mitochondrial DNA is passed down from mother to child, it leaves out the story of the father's DNA. The nuclear genome, which contains DNA from both parents, is far more informative. Unfortunately, says Krauss, only a few of the mummies' nuclear genomes were well preserved, and even fewer passed the strict contamination tests. His team ended up with nuclear genome samples from only 3 mummies, each from a different time period. And then, Krauss's team compared the mummies' mitochondrial and nuclear DNA to ancient and modern populations in the Near East and Africa. They discovered that ancient Egyptians closely resembled ancient and modern Near Eastern populations, especially those in the Levant. What's more, the genetics of the mummies remained remarkably consistent even as different powers conquered the empire. So, says Yehia Gad, a molecular geneticist at the National Research Center in Cairo and a founder of the Egyptian Museum's Ancient DNA Lab, quote, it's possible that the mitochondrial genomes simply don't record the genetic contributions of foreign fathers, end quotes. The 3 mummies with nuclear genome also show striking genetic continuity, it's pointed out. Later, however, something did alter the genomes of Egyptians. Although the mummies contain almost no DNA from sub-Saharan Africa, some 15 to 20% of modern Egyptians' mitochondrial DNA does reflect sub-Saharan ancestry. Says Johannes Kraus, quote, "It's really unexpected when we see this very late shift," end quotes. Kraus suspects increased trade along the Nile, including slave trade, or the spread of Islam in the Middle Ages might have intensified contact between northern and sub-Saharan Africa. Geneticist Iosef Lazaridis of Harvard Medical School in Boston, who studies how and when ancient populations mixed, calls the new results, quote, "a big accomplishment," end quotes. But he wonders how representative Abu Sar el-Malik is of ancient Egypt as a whole. Quote, "Egypt is a big place," end quotes, he says. Other regions may have experienced these conquests in different ways, some perhaps with more genetic mixing. But these researchers now are hoping for more revelations to come. Quote, "Now that it's been proven that it's possible to sample from mummies, well, there are literally thousands of mummies," end quotes. Let's look at some of those thousands of UFO reports, shall we? Well, we'll start with one. It's out of Tucson, Arizona. UFOstalker.com brings us this. It's got a MUFON case number 84279 for purposes of identification and tracking. This event took place on the 9th of June, 2017. It got a same-day report. In summary, our witness offers intermittently white-green point of light observed hovering, darting in a relatively confined part of sky above tree line. Sighting specifics go something like this. The viewing distance, unknown. Altitude, treetop. Sighting duration, 7 minutes. But the features on the object are simply described as unknown. The flight path of this object was hovering, then path, and its shape was also unknown. The witness has wonderfully put together this account in points 1 through 6, so that's the best way for us to read them to you. Here we go. Point 1. I was on my apartment's balcony, the coordinates available on request, looking southwest, toward Sentinel Peak. It was visible in the distance. Point 2. Movement of this point of light caught my attention out of the corner of my eye. Point 3. At first I assumed this was a meteor, but it didn't burn out or hit the ground. Rather, it stopped completely. It hovered there for a few seconds, and then it darted up and to the right. Point 4. This point of light was alternating between white and green, very bright, and it shone like a typical aircraft anti-collision light while it was white. Now, the green variation may suggest it's marking that starboard side of the aircraft. However, I never saw it turn red on the port side. Based on its flight maneuvers, I assume I would see both sides of the craft. Its actions included hovering, darting in a straight line, and random, abrupt, yet smooth, in other words, a rigid 90-degree turn, for example. I observed it darting along the X and Y axes. I was not able to determine the Z-axis movement, if any. This is too technical for this broadcaster. We need a reference book beside us. But our witness continues, this thing's flight activity was confined to below the tree line and not visible to up above 20 degrees above the horizon. It was confined to the same roughly 10-degree area of the sky. All of its flight activity occurred in that same small part of the sky, with Sentinel Peak showing directly behind it in the distance. From my vantage point, my observation lasted from exactly 1:40 to 1:47 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Point 5. What I felt was mainly curiosity. It didn't seem real. It was different than how I imagine a drone is able to fly. It seemed to be too fast, with odd movements. It wasn't like a helicopter, and it made no sound. This thing turned green, then it turned back to white. I could not get a good read on the distance. My best guess is 0.25 miles. I tried to record it on a very old iPhone, but it didn't pick up this dot of light. Point 6. It dropped down the final time below the tree line. Could this be someone's toy? I watched that small part of sky for another 40 or so minutes, and it never reappeared. Indeed, gentle listeners, good, bad, or indifferent, drones are among us, certainly creating a new wrinkle in the "what is that we're seeing in the sky" category. Here's a sighting from Denali National Park and Preserve in Alaska. MUFON case number 84280. This took place actually last year, 2016, on the 24th of May. Could this be yet another anniversary-ish sighting trigger? Something that says inside the witness, gotta get this reported. Well, here's the summary. 1 is the lights that appear above the clouds. 2nd is, I don't know what it is. There are photos, and that's what the witness was referring to. The viewing distance under sighting specifics and altitude, object features, flight path, shape, all of those things simply are labeled unknown. Here's the account. My husband and I were driving along the roads toward Denali National Park. I took a picture of the clouds and mountains. Later, while I was looking at these pictures, I saw the 2 bright lights above the clouds. There were no planes in the area, and the light wasn't reflecting off of anything. It seemed as though these looked like headlights. The lights disappeared quickly. In the second picture, and I sent an email to the national park and never got a response, but you can see it for yourself. Determine what you think this could be. It looks like some sort of craft with legs. I thought maybe this could be some sort of observatory. This broadcaster tosses in, yes, there's a round white dome shape to this thing in one of the photos. Back to the story. I wrote to the park. I sent a copy of the attached picture, but they did not respond to my inquiry. At first I thought maybe this could be a campground, but then I don't believe people camp at this height in the mountains. Judge for yourself. In the third shot, we were flying over the mountains. We noticed extremely bright, shining objects on the ground. Again, we didn't know if there was something on the mountain that could reflect that light. Our plane wasn't in the path of these reflective objects. And the witness suggests then if we blow up the pictures, we can see these mentioned items. Yes, see them you can. They are mysterious. Check them out via link at ufo-headline-news.com. What we've checked out, all the time zones, all these clocks on the wall indicate we've got to fly because that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to Inception Radio Network and Off the Beaten Path, our regular weekend feature here at Inception Radio Network. Take care of each other. We're all in this together. This is Carol Carl. See you Monday.